I think the social workers should know when they take kids to someone's home, they should be prepared.
I didn't understand the system.
I'm saying, you know, this is ridiculous that I had to find out a lot of things on my own.
It's hard for me to understand the principles behind it.
If you're going to be a social worker, you might want to be able to relate to that. So you got to be able to relate to these kids that have been through this.
To me, it was personal because she was checking on me.
She was more like she made it seem like she was more like instead of social worker, more like a auntie or something, because she always was there to help you out. Even when we got older and we seen her going to a different, you know, social workers, seeing our old, so she recognized us, we recognized her, and she was still, hey, how you doing? Give us a hug and all that other stuff. So she was always there no matter what. Even though she wasn't our social worker, she was always there. We can still call her if we need something.
Hi, I'm Mitch Mackey. I'm Vice Provost for Student Academic Success here at California State University, Dominguez Hills. I'd like to welcome you to learn about one of our innovative programs here on campus, the Master of Social Work program. California State University, Dominguez Hills is located in a diverse urban setting, and the university is committed to serving this area in a variety of ways. This means recruiting a diverse student body and also having a curriculum and programs that speak to our community's needs. Having a Master of Social Work program that utilizes a critical race theory perspective is a prime example of how we are able to do this. The critical race theory curriculum challenges students to approach social work differently by providing them with the tools to use a dynamic perspective to identify race, class, and gender in achieving social justice with their clients and the greater community. I hope that this video gives you a sense of the necessity of integrating a critical race theory approach with social work practice and showcases Dominguez Hills' unique and innovative program.
Hi, my name is Nicole Vasquez. I'm an instructor here in the Master of Social Work program at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Our program was founded in 2006 and is the only social work program in the nation that is rooted in critical race theory. Critical race theory, or CRT, originates in legal studies and critiques the relationship between race, racism, and power in how society is constructed. There are several tenets that are considered central to a CRT focus.
First, CRT assumes the standpoint that racism is ordinary, meaning that it is inherent to everyday personal interactions into how institutions are structured and how cities are built. The second tenet is a commitment to deconstructing the myth of meritocracy in the United States. CRT theorists challenge the notion of a colorblind society and argue that individuals are impacted by structural racism in ways that do not allow for a level playing field when it comes to education, income, and other metrics of well-being. Third, CRT scholar Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality to refer to the idea that individuals experience oppression differently based on where they stand at the intersection of their multiple identities. A fourth tenet of CRT is interest convergence. This term refers to the notion that social change does not occur until the dominant group in society can benefit from it. Thus, in the case of the civil rights movement, for example, change was slow to occur until the larger society saw a need to improve U.S. standing in global human rights. Fifth, CRT centers narrative and the voice of people of color. By focusing on the stories of individuals' lived experiences, we are better able to understand their struggle and effectively work with them to address issues that they may be facing. Here, Dr. Larry Ortiz, the founding chair of the CSUDH MSW department, discusses some elements of a CRT approach to social work education.
So then what would you say critical race theory actually looks like in social work practice?
That's a very good question. Part of my initial conversations with Dean Mackey were, okay, so what kind of program do you want to have? We're located here in this really cross-section of diversity. You know, you're near Compton, you're near Watts, you've got 85% of your student population are students of color. So what do you want to do that reflects the university. And that's always been something that I've been interested in doing. Critical race theory is a theory of critique. In other words, it's a way of critiquing then how our society is designed, how it works, the social order, the master narrative, in the way in which it advantages some folks, disadvantages others. And in the disadvantaging part, it helps then to explain how that disadvantage occurs at a number of different levels, whether it's economic, whether it's social relational, or whether it's individual at the psychic level. Because we know that, for example, marginalized people seem to have a diminished sense of possibilities, a diminished sense of self, don't have the same level of confidence, and the way in which the way in which there is the world is experienced is oftentimes one of fear, one of trauma, and so therefore, you know, it affects the psychological makeup of folks.
So based on everything you just shared, it seems like CRT, critical race theory, is a natural fit into, was a natural fit into the creation of the curriculum.
Yes, I think so. I think what critical race theory does for us is it creates a plausibility structure, a plausible paradigm that really understands and explains, anyway, the way in which race is a all-pervasive, both social as well as even individual psychologically force in the lives of people.
Why do you think that it's important now to bring this perspective, this critical race theory perspective, to the social work profession?
I think the timing is probably right. You're certainly positioned, I think, in the profession and also in society to think about what's beyond this multiculturalism, what's beyond cultural competency, etc., that is reflective of the changing demographics of the world, okay, of globalization, but even globalization, just in what's happening here now in California, but of course in the entire country, where we're becoming an increasingly diverse society. Which means that these old ways of looking at the world, old ways meaning kind of Euro-American Western notions of theory developed from linear ways of thinking, are probably not relevant. And as we talked about earlier, probably have a strong colonialistic component to them. So if we continue to use those theories unexamined, uncritiqued, what we're going to do is continue to risk in our practice some level of further colonization of diverse populations and not hearing the voices and not respecting the culture and not understanding the need for justice. And I think those are the big concerns that we should be thinking about as a profession, because all of the things I just talked about are reflective of the unique values of social work.
Maybe you can just start off telling us how you were first introduced to critical race theory.
I remember really hearing about critical race theory through other people who had been there longer than myself in the urban planning and public policy field. And so I learned that there had been a history of critical race theory. A class had been started by different folks over the years, and so I was actually part in my second year of actually being in the class. It wasn't part of our curriculum, it was extra work, and really talking about having those harder conversations, both the personal and also how that connected to our practice as policymakers, as urban planners, and as social workers.
So now that you're a practicing social worker, what does being a CRT practitioner mean to you?
What it meant to me was going beyond that term of cultural competency and cultural sensitivity that I kept hearing, year after year. We are training you to be culturally competent and sensitive, and that always felt like it just felt flat. Like it didn't come alive to me, and it really felt again that it was us learning about Asian Americans and Latino Americans, but if you have lived that experience, I think as a woman of color, a heterosexual woman, that's a very different experience that doesn't come to life, I think, in classrooms. And so for me, it really means challenging and having very difficult conversations about race, about patriarchy, about different points of oppression.
Work practitioner to me means being able to take into consideration the community, the family or people I'm working with comes from, what their strengths are, what their background is, the race, generationally. What's the history with this family? Working with DCFS, you want to take into consideration how often they come through our system, the generations, the grandmother, then the mother, then the children. So being a practitioner to me means being able to take all of those things into consideration when working with families.
So I think you've started to touch on it, but maybe do you think you can go a little bit deeper? What can you explain what incorporating CRT in social work practice actually looks like?
I think for me too, it also means continuously assessing my points of privilege and power and my positionality of privilege and power. That even when someone is in front of me as my client, that I, as a social worker, just that title of it in and of itself already carries a big history. It has a lot of power. I'm not just a helping professional coming in to, help them, feel better about themselves psychologically and emotionally, but that I have to continuously be aware, what is my position and as a social worker, as a therapist, what does that mean to this person in front of me? Because that history isn't neat, that history of social work, that history of mental health is very oppressive and has been very oppressive to communities of color. And so I feel that I'm continuously having to see, am I being complicit in a system of oppression here? Am I oppressing, this person in front of me in any way? Am I imposing something because of my position of power? It really implies that you have to kind of really open yourself up personally and really look into, am I being racist? Am I being patriarchal? Am I being, homophobic? And that doesn't feel good to people. And so I think that and that's important for me to do. To be a better practitioner, I have to continuously be opening myself up. Of course, in safe spaces, but,
CRT, when we studied it, it helped to first assess ourselves, our personal biases, how we're going to approach this family from the first level. And from coming to school here, I always remember meet the client where they are, not where I want them to be. So oftentimes we walk into a crisis and we need to be able to meet the client where they are.
It also means, for me personally, tying the personal and the psychological to larger systems of oppression, to histories of slavery and genocide and patriarchy. That I'm not just, treating this person in front of me. They're not just a person who's depressed, but why are they depressed? And does that depression, carry something, longer than, they lost a parent, or are there other things historically that bring this person to this room in front of me? So that is
great. The research consists of?
Over the past 2 years, we did a series of focus groups and then followed that up with 11 in-depth interviews. So we took a sample of our alumni who worked in the child welfare system. They had to at least be working in LA County for at least 1 year. I think the maximum was 3 years. We're a relatively new program. And we were kind of focused on 3 guiding questions. The first one was, how do they experience racial disparities in the system? We all know that there's racial disparities in public child welfare, so we wanted to see how do our workers, once they're out in the field, after they graduate, what does that look like for them? The second question was looking at how they were able to employ a social justice approach within public child welfare system. So were there opportunities for individual workers to be involved in what they consider social justice practice? The third question was, did they feel that their MSW program with the focus on critical race theory impacted their social work practice? And if so, in what ways?
So what were some of the findings from your research?
One of our findings centered on identifying racial discrimination in the public child welfare system, and how do our alumni identify racism when they're in the field. And one factor was rate of referral and retention. We know that there's a disproportionate number of children of color in the public child welfare system. Another factor that was identified around the racial discrimination in the child welfare system was the belief in stereotypes and some of the judgments that social workers that were already trained and working in the system brought to the table. For instance, for example, one of the workers from our alumni group gave a poignant example of one of the clients overhearing their social worker call their place of residence like that ghetto place, and that prevented that family or that member from that person from calling the social worker and following up.
So our third set of findings, and really what we were most excited to learn about, was what was the impact of our critical race theory curriculum on our students when they get out in the field, and especially in the public child welfare system. The first thing we found, or our students reported, that they felt they had a heightened awareness of their own personal bias and the previous misconceptions they had and how it impacts their work. So really, rather than when social workers talk about they have a self-awareness, our students felt that they critiqued themselves and were able to continually kind of question their own personal biases as they go into the field. The second was they felt that they had increased empathy for clients. And that was a result of their understanding of structural reasons they might be in their situation. So rather than blaming the client or wondering why they made decisions that they did, they really looked at and understood the structural reasons for their situation, in addition to identifying with some of the situations because they themselves were from the same communities or had family members in the same situation.
Also, our findings found that CRT really helped social workers operate from that person and environment perspective. So this meant they felt more equipped to facilitate more complete assessments, taking into account all those different dimensions of the client's intersectionality. In addition to that, they're more able to identify structural reasons for family situations rather than pathologizing them, as, some group or another. Another finding related to our study concerned how CRT helps social workers truly examine just the power differentials between the social worker and client relationship. So this meant they were more equipped to listen, they were more equipped to, again, ask questions rather than assuming. There was a sense of this bi-directional learning where they acknowledge learning from their clients as well as clients learning from them, and gaining those resources from them, and this was really important, especially in building rapport with their clients. One thing we did hear a lot of was that social workers trained in CRT were more inclined to emphasize respect in building those relationships. So asking permission to go into their house first, or just really respecting different cultural norms and respecting certain boundaries and everything, and that really did a lot to build rapport with their clients, and they felt that it really enhanced their experience.
Next, Dr. Ortiz and our MSWs share their thoughts on why integrating critical race theory into social work practice is key and what it means for them to be CRT practitioners.
It's important because what we have is we have an approach that is really revolves around this idea of a road less traveled, a more organic approach, very dynamic, somewhat very contextual, and very much rooted in understanding culture and race. And, you know, all those things don't lend themselves easily to the kind of step 1, step 2, step 3. There are steps involved, but the steps tend to be a little bit more creative, conceptual, and involve a sense of reflexivity and reflection. The best thing is that field instructors can do is to maybe take a little bit more of that student learner kind of active role that we are promoting with service users, and let the students do some teaching, with field instructors about why they're doing what they're doing.
To not do it means that I can possibly really mess up someone's life, and that I can probably continue to make this person feel crazy, that it's just their problem, right? It's just their depression that lives inside of their body, or their trauma, or their anxiety, versus your depression, your anxiety, your PTSD is tied to larger things. It's tied to communal macro systems, so it's not you as a person that's bad, that's disposable, that's wrecked, but that there have been these histories that have brought us all to this point. So
I feel that getting my MSW here at Dominguez with the CRT perspective sets me apart from other people, because I can apply the different lenses and assess in my job as a social worker what's in the best interest of the family. Working for a big institution, a government agency, someone who doesn't have that education, the CRT knowledge, would just come from a policy perspective. And policy is not always fair, and it's not always in the best interest of the families.
And I find this with some of my white colleagues asking a lot, well, do we bring up our whiteness? Do we say, like, what does it feel like for you to be in front of a white clinician or with a white clinician? And I say yes, yes, you say that, and regardless of how that person responds, that you are challenging that conversation, or you're challenging that environment or those power dynamics. And so for me, it's like, yeah, I can understand that it's not comfortable for you to tell me, a social worker who could easily call DCFS, and has the power to report, So I understand when you don't want to be vulnerable, but I'm asking you very intimate things, and what does that mean to tell something so intimate to a complete stranger who has power but is not related to you, and could at any point feel like I'm turning on them, because of that power.
If you don't know to look at all the different lenses of race and gender and all of that, sexual preference, you can sometimes harm families.
Thank you for joining us. Although we don't have all of the answers, we hope that our approach to social work education can serve as a model for other educators and practitioners on how to integrate critical race theory into social work practice. We hope that this model will be dynamic, one that is continually evolving depending on the context of unique community settings and the standpoint of each CRT social work practitioner.
Hi, I'm Makeda Graham, Chair of the CSUDH Masters of Social Work Department. I want to thank you for watching this training video on our program and on the impact of integrating CRT into social work. I encourage you to continue to explore this topic and to investigate how to best practice social work by utilising interventions that stress empowerment and the strengths of your clients and community. Please review our website for the most current information for our department.